Irena Varjabedian's been an activist in Los Angeles since the early 2000s. Her parents were both Armenian. She was born of Armenian parents in Lebanon, where she tells me the Lebanese people, the Arabs, warmly received them. And her father was a victim of 2 genocides, one when he was 3 and one when he was 6. So she knows a lot about that. And since then, she's been an activist around everything from Cuba, Iraq, Syria, and of course, Palestine. So I'm very happy to introduce her, to have her here, and she's going to introduce Ara, our other speaker, and the documentary, because she knows them a lot better than I do.
Thank you, Carol Francis. Okay, so, well, I just want to give a small background of my childhood. when I was growing up, every day I had to hear the horrors, what my family went through. Marching in the desert, you know, death marches, how they had to survive every day, hide in caves. It's just like crazy, you know, hearing all these stories when you're a child. My grandma, one time she told me that all the Armenians were hiding in a cave. It was winter, it was snowing. And then when they woke up, they saw frozen Turkish soldiers outside the cave. So hearing all these stories every day during my childhood, and my father was telling me how when they were burning the church where all the Armenians were hiding, how the children and the women had to get together and put the fire off, filling buckets of water and putting the fire off. So saving, you know, lots of people there. And my father was one of them who was carrying buckets of water. Anyway, I get too emotional. I don't want to continue. So I think, you know, when people talk about peace and justice issues, I would like more Americans to know what happened, all those injustices, because for many, many years, the Turkish lobby is extremely powerful in America. They've been trying to silence the truth about the Armenian genocide. And, you know, most Americans, they really don't know what really happened, the truth. Anyway, so I picked up a short documentary, 20 minutes documentary. It will give you a small background. And then Ara, my friend, he wrote a book lately, and his grandfather was very famous organizing the resistance. So we can start with the documentary. Thank you.
My name is Manoogian, and as Irena Varjabedian said, I'm Armenian, as she is, you can tell from the name. And my grandfather was actually a very well-known Armenian. He wasn't that well-known, actually, at the time. And let me just jump in here and tell you that the documentary that you saw really just scrapes the surface, and just barely scrapes the surface. So what's in the documentary is kind of the official story that the world knows of the Armenian genocide. They know it as an ethnic conflict. They know that it's, you know, Muslims against Christians and so on and so forth. As true as that may seem, that's not the story. That's not the real story. The book that you can see in my screen here, called Betrayal, the Promise Never Kept, Genocide in the West's Secret War for Oil, is based on my grandfather Shahan Natali's archive. And if you go to shahannatali.com, you can actually read the free electronic version of the book. It's an 800-page book. Don't let that scare you or intimidate you. More than half of it is an appendix, which has rare or impossible to find historical documents that are used within the book to present the real story of not only the Armenian Genocide, but the overthrow of the Ottoman Empire, the toppling of the Russian Empire and the Tsar. And all of this is based on these documents, I can safely say, is carried out by what we call the globalists today. You know, you can call it what you want. You want to call it the cabal, the Illuminati, secret societies, and so on and so forth. It's a story of intrigue, but it's a real story. It's not a conspiracy theory. It's just a conspiracy. And it's something that today we are actually facing, and we have been facing since prior to the turn of the century. So as you saw in the documentary, the Armenian Genocide actually started in 1894. And the story of our family started in 1895. It was October of 1895. This is all in the book. My grandfather, Shahan Natali, was 11 years old during the Hamidian massacres. And he was from a village called Husenik, which is in the Kharpert region. There was a city of Harput, they call it. We call it Kharpert. And that is where they had Roberts College, which was formed by the missionaries, the American missionaries, the Protestants. They came over to convert the Muslim Turks, the Islamic Turks, into Christians to bring peace to that region. And unfortunately, the Muslims weren't interested, but the Armenians who were Christians that had been suppressed embraced the movement or the missionaries, and they were the ones that were benefiting from them, and they were getting educated, and they were being reintroduced to their Christian values of, you know, peace and love and caring and so on and so forth. And sadly, that really led up to what we know as the Armenian Genocide. And the reason why it led up to that was that those globalists were using the missionaries for something else. Armenia, the ancient kingdom of Armenia, was known in the world for its wealth of minerals. And one of the minerals that was very valuable at that time and that was very important strategically was oil. And at that time, Armenia, around Lake Van, which is the largest lake in Armenia, of Western Armenia, I should say, it had 1/6 of the world's accessible crude oil. And the United States government and Europe and even Asia, Japan, they were interested in having access to this. And so in 1895, 1896, when the Hamidian massacres took place, not for the oil, but they took for other reasons. There were different reasons, and it's all in the book. The American missionaries sustained damage to their churches, their buildings, and so on, close to the tune of between $75,000 and $100,000. And the Sultan was responsible for that because the Americans, they had treaties with them. There were protection treaties and so on at the time, commercial economic treaties that were in place. And so around 1900, and again, this is all in the book, Theodore Roosevelt sent a rear admiral named Colby M. Chester. And I'm going to get into Colby M. Chester a little bit in this. I'm going to be very brief about this. Again, we're talking about an 800-page book. About 400 pages of that, 350 pages is the actual 35 chapters that cover all these topics that I'm just going to really just touch on. So basically, Theodore Roosevelt sent over Colby M. Chester to collect on these damages, which Colby M. Chester was successful in doing. And at the same time, he became friends with the Sultan, Sultan Hamid. And he was able to, over a period of time after Colby M. Chester became retired, he was sent back, and he actually entered into a concessions deal known as the Chester Concessions, named after Colby M. Chester. And it was for the minerals found in the Ottoman Empire, and very specifically Mesopotamia and the Armenian territories, which included copper, gold, precious minerals, agricultural potential. At that time, Armenia was able to produce 10 times more agricultural products, whether that's livestock and crops and so on, than it actually needed for the population in the region. So it was very, very, very strategic to have access to this in this world where power is oil, minerals, and food. And in fact, later on, Colby M. Chester's son, Colby M. Chester Jr., became actually the president of General Foods, which was a cereal company at that time, and they had their eye on that territory to produce cereal for them. And this, again, is all covered in the book. So basically, cutting to the chase, the globalists who were involved with Colby M. Chester were the same that were backing Talat Pasha, as you heard, and the Young Turks. And Talat Pasha and the Young Turks, they originated from an area called Salonika, which is in modern-day Greece today. And this is where they formed their movement. And this movement of the Young Turks actually goes back to the 1870s. And you would have heard in the documentary about the Armenians and the revolutionary movement and how they took a bank. There was a mention of a bank. It was actually Bank Ottoman, which is where all the gold that belongs to the Sultan was. That operation, although they say the Armenian revolutionaries carried this out and they killed some officials and so on, it was actually a joint operation, and that was the start of the overthrow of the government. And involved in that, and this is all very well documented in the books, were the Greeks and were also the Young Turks. And the Armenians were supposed to take the Bank Ottoman, and then the Greeks and the Turks, the Young Turks, were supposed to jump in. Well, they never did. And as a result of that, the Bank Ottoman operation was a failure, beyond a miserable failure. And as the people that took the bank were shipped off to France on a yacht that belonged to one of the ambassadors in the Ottoman Empire, about 5,000 Armenians were massacred in the streets because of this blunder, because they went in and they did this operation. So the Armenians were always trying to do what was right, trying to stand up against their oppressors. And in the end, and they would do it with the Young Turks, and they would do it with whoever was willing to do it. But in the end, the Armenians were usually stuck, holding the bag and all out there just hanging out on their own. So I'm going to fast forward here and go, Armenian massacres take place, the genocide takes place, and so on and so forth. My grandfather was actually, as the orphan of the Hamidian massacres in 1895, where his father and numerous relatives, a dozen relatives, were killed, and he was spared thanks to a neighboring Armenian, a young boy who was older than him, who was working for a Turk, this young boy's father was in America, and my great-grandfather was taking care of their family, basically. They were neighbors. He was snatched away by this 14-year-old Armenian who worked on a Turkish plantation in the village of Husenig, and he was hidden there from the massacres. He came back later, and he found his mother, who was mourning over the beheaded corpse of his father, and his father was a tax collector. So he was one of the prominent members of the Armenian society in that region. And so my 11-year-old grandfather with his mother dragged the body, the beheaded corpse of his father, and with his bare hands, he had to dig a grave for his father while his mother watched over him. And as he buried his father, his mother made him take an oath for revenge and to prevent this type of thing from happening in the future. So when the Armenian massacres took place, my grandfather, fortunately, was of the 1915. So we're fast forwarding now 20 years. My grandfather finds himself in America. He had actually come in 1905, fleeing prosecution because he had become a revolutionary. And at night, they were doing night raids on these villages that were once Armenian villages. now occupied by Kurds and Turks, and they were making sure that the Kurds and Turks were not going to enjoy these villages. So they would do these night raids, and they would burn down houses and so on and so forth, and probably kill some prominent people. And my grandfather, who by this time had become a school teacher, had been discovered as being one of these 3 night raiders that were in the region. So he fled to America, where his uncles had come in the late 1800s. And he ended up on the East Coast. Eventually, my grandfather would pass away at the age of 99, almost 100, in Watertown, Massachusetts, which is the general area which he was living. So my grandfather, who was now stuck in America during the 1915 genocide, for whatever reasons, and it's all in the book, you can read about that, he basically, seeing that the world was not really interested in punishing Talat Pasha and the Young Turks, and in fact, they were all working to bring him back to power. And the reason being is Talat Pasha, knowing our history today and knowing what happened then, Talat Pasha was the future leader of the world. You heard that they said the Turks are coming back and the world is going to shake in their boots, or whatever the dialogue was in this documentary. And basically they were going to rule the world. And in fact, that was the plan. The globalists who had brought them to power and who were backing them at that time were including the representative of the Rothschild family, who was born in the House of Rothschild. There was a banker, a New York banker named Jacob H. Schiff, and he's very much featured in the book. And in fact, Jacob H. Schiff is a great-granduncle of our Congress representative, Adam Schiff. And they look very much alike, and this is also documented in the book. And basically, Jacob H. Schiff was of Jewish descent, and the Young Turks from Salonika, many of them were actually crypto-Jews, which were Jews who their families had converted to Islam by force. They had a choice to either convert or be killed, and so they did convert. So this was more of an operation, or the organization, the Young Turks, were actually being backed by these globalists, these bankers, which included J.P. Morgan. It's also very well documented in the book. And there's other names. And you saw in the documentary, for instance, Henry Morgenthau. Henry Morgenthau was a part of this whole scheme also. Although the Armenians celebrate him, the reality is, and this is also in the book, Henry Morgenthau was there on a special mission, as he calls it. And all of this is documented. These were documented in documents, in newspapers at the time, and so on and so forth. So these are not things, these aren't theories, these are actual facts that I'm presenting to you, which are also presented in this book. So basically, the world was going to bring Talat Pasha back to power, and he was going to rule that region. And my grandfather, who had already decided that, if the world fails to punish them, he, the orphaned child from the Hamidian massacres, would take it upon himself, because he did take an oath on his father's corpse from his mother, forced on him or imposed on him by his mother. And so when the world was failing to do this, and in fact, in Rome in the end of 1920, early 1921, January of 1921, there was actually a conference in Rome. And I have to put a little footnote in here. Talat Pasha was the grand, I'm not sure what the title is right now, it's slipping my mind. Basically, he was part of the Masonic order, and he was the head Mason for that entire region, for the Ottoman Empire. And he was brought into that post in 1908, 1909, after the overthrow of the Sultan. And so he actually was a part of the Masonic order. And there's different levels, there's different sides of the Masonic order. My grandfather, Shahan Natali, would eventually join the Masonic order. But this is long after these assassinations took place. So my grandfather, I say assassinations, he organized basically the assassinations of Talat Pasha, Cemil Pasha, Enver, which is mentioned, was killed in 1922. He wasn't killed in 1922. He actually staged his death. Enver Pasha would probably, we believe, live to be an old man. And he was in the background helping who would eventually become the founder, another young Turk, of modern day Turkey, known as Mustafa Kemal, who is known amongst the Turks as Ataturk. And so when we talk about modern day Turkey and the Turks who are denying the genocide, the reality is modern day Turkey is a continuation of the Young Turks, the Committee of Union and Progress, and so on, all of these war criminals. And Mustafa Kemal, the founder of modern day Turkey, was actually condemned to death for war crimes. And those were all lifted. So what is the motivation? We talked about minerals. We talked about the Chester concessions. I'm going to share with you on my screen here. Hang on. Let's do this so the right thing comes up. I was going to play a bunch of different like snippets from my book, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to just play one, and this will, hang on, what is this? Not disable participant. Okay, is there a way that I can get my screen undisabled? So I just
gave you co-hosting, so can you try it one more time?
Okay, I will do that. Here we go. So now I'm going to play for you a little snippet, and this is from our book, Betrayal, the Promise Never Kept. And this is an interview that Colby M. Chester, now the retired Colby M. Chester, had given, and I call this a confession of a rear admiral. So I'm going to play this. This is going to be read by Microsoft, so you'll be able to hear this, and I'm going to stop it at some point. But you need to understand the mindset of America, and this is not just the mindset of America in 1923. This is the mindset of America today and prior to this. So this is what America is built on. So when we talk about slavery, we talk about territories, we talk about America being everywhere and having their tentacles everywhere, sucking out resources of other countries that, you know, would otherwise help the native population survive, and so on. So here we go. Let's listen to this. This is from Colby M. Chester's interview in 1923, I believe it is.
Now there is nothing left in this country for us to develop. If we keep up with our current requirements, we are doing well. To pay our debts, we must get new territory to develop. I've got it for the country. That's the thing in a nutshell. Lausanne has nothing to do with this. It is not an issue between the government of the United States and any other government. The syndicate that I represent had gone into Asia Minor just as commercial bodies have gone into South America. As American businessmen, we have the right to go to our government for protection against any foreign government that raises to interfere with a legitimate enterprise. I want to eradicate the idea that I have carried this country into trouble. This protection was designed under the Roosevelt administration. Wars broke out and prevented our taking over the property. Now we are ready to proceed. With materials from America, we are going to build another Denver, another Albuquerque, another Cheyenne. To become prosperous, Turkey waits only on railways to bring out its products. To illustrate, the cost of taking ore from the copper mines at Argonne to the border for smelting is $50 a ton, a prohibitive price. Railways will carry the ore at $2 a ton. If, as I believe, there is enough oil to pay the British war debt to the United States, there is in the whole concession enough potential commerce to pay all the national debt of the United States. American business concerns have been trying to get into South America but have found that they can't compete with European nations in that field. The British and French have covered South America with banks.
Okay, so I'm going to stop there. You can read all this. You can see in my thing, shahanatali.com. This is in the book. So basically, let me stop sharing the screen here so I can come back on. Okay, so basically, what he's talking about, he got the concessions. This is the Chester concessions, and these were ratified by the new Mustafa Kemal's new modern day Turkey. And there were people from Standard Oil, so that would have been the Rockefellers. they were against this because they wanted the oil. There was a big fight going on with Asia, with all sorts of different countries. Everyone had been promised a little bit of the action. In the end, the Americans got it because the Americans were really the ones who were backing it. So for instance, how did Mustafa Kemal come to power? Well, as I said, he was being backed by these globalists. And in fact, in 1915, in December, this is in the book, the globalists, their representative, they had a representative, his name was James W. Colt, and he was working for Jacob Schiff, who is the representative for the Rothschilds. And he actually went into the Ottoman Empire in 1907 and did a full survey of Mesopotamia, but especially focusing on Armenia. So I have a copy of that report, and what's really interesting is the person that helped him with this report, the one that knew the region better than anybody else, was a man known as, his name was Garakin Bastarmajian, who was also known as Armen Garo. And the significance of Armen Garo is he was the lead of the Bank Ottoman operation, the one that I talked about that was the miserable failure in 1895, 1896. So basically, he helped James W. Colt, who was hired by Jacob Schiff and J.P. Morgan, to do a full survey of that region. So they knew what was there. They knew how to get it out. As you said, as you heard in that little tidbit of the confession of Colby M. Chester, that they were able to get copper ore out at $2 a ton because of the infrastructure that they were going to put in. And you also heard how the value of those concessions were enough not only to pay the national debt, the war debt from the British, but it was enough to pay the American national debt that they had at that time. So this is what, sadly, the real story is about genocide. It's about oil, it's about power, and it's not, religion is usually used as a tool. The old divide and conquer plays into this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to stop here now because there's a lot that I can go over, but you can actually read the book. It's a free read online. You can also order it if you need a paperback or hardback cover copy. You can get it on Amazon. You can look it up. It's there. I want to also let you know that this book, I was planning on using this book to petition the United States Congress because, as you know, or I hope most of you know, the United Nations has a genocide convention, and it's the prevention and punishment of the crime of genocide. And the United States and over 150 nations have actually signed into this treaty with the United Nations. And to date, one of the biggest obligations that all of these countries that sign into this, including Turkey, Turkey's also signed into this, Armenia's signed into this, all these countries that have committed genocides in the past are actually signed into this treaty, and they have some certain obligations that they haven't carried out. So my latest project, which is basically taking some of the components of this book, is it's a book. It's titled Mandate for Global Peace, and basically every country that is signed into the treaty must pass legislation which will punish and prevent genocide. So through this, I'm hoping that we're going to be able to use this book to petition governments, and I'm going to start with the United States government. So I plan on printing 600 copies of this book to make sure every Congress representative, every senator has a copy of this book, so they are aware of their obligation to the genocide treaty. This is not petitioning them to say, hey, you should think about this. This is telling them you have a mandate that you must fulfill in passing legislation to prevent genocides in the future and to punish those that have carried out genocide, because genocides do not have a statute of limitations. So in the case of the African Americans, for instance, they had a cultural genocide. They were taken from their lands and brought here. So they're entitled to reparations, as are the American Indians, as are the Armenians, as are anybody that's been subjected to genocide has the right to reparations. And the people that are behind these genocides, it always gets back to these globalists, these these bankers, these powerful people today that are causing havoc for our world, as we're seeing happen today during this pandemic that we're facing. And so the plan is to get enough people interested, pass legislation so all those that have been subjected to genocide, or the descendants of those that have been subjected to genocide, can push for reparations and hopefully bankrupt these globalists. In the case of the Armenian Genocide and what's in this book, it's very clearly documented who was behind them, because in the Genocide Convention, it doesn't say just governments. It also says anybody that was involved in perpetrating or carrying out these, or helped to perpetrate or carry out genocides. So I'm going to end my little talk with that. And I think if we're going to have questions and answers, maybe Irena and I can answer some of your questions you might have. Thank you.
No, sorry, Ara, can you mention something about Raphael Lemkin's term of genocide?
Sure, we can do that. So Raphael Lemkin, who was a Polish Jew attorney who witnessed in his lifetime not only the Armenian genocide and what was going on, and you heard the trial of Solomon Telidian. He saw that as a young man and was very fascinated about how and why should the victims of a genocide have to carry out the punishment when these people were punished. So he actually created the word genocide, and he was the one that was the biggest pusher to get the United Nations to pass this genocide convention. And although it passed, as I said, and it was ratified by many, many countries, you know, we've got, I think it's 154, 153 countries at this point are members. None of them have actually taken it to the next step. And this is what we're going to push for, is we're going to push for the final step, the obvious step, the obligation that all of these countries have signed into and are not fulfilling, which I believe could bring global peace. So the idea is that if we take the profit out of genocide, we could actually reduce, if not eliminate, genocide, because once it's not profitable, there's no reason for people to actually carry out these crimes unless it truly is a hate crime or it's a power grab, but the world won't tolerate that. Thank you.
Phil Ray, this is David Plennan. Can you put me on your list of questioners?
Okay, sure. May I add something before the Q&A?
Yes.
Yes, okay, thank you, Steve. Okay, first of all, I just want to correct where my father, when he was 3 or 6 years old, they were putting up the fires. It was in a German orphanage. It was not in a church. It was an orphanage where all, first it was an orphanage, but then all the Armenians went there to hide, and then the Turks put it on fire. And then when I went there in 2019, somebody took me to that orphanage. It was really, it was just a great trip. I also found the church where all my ancestry for 33 generations, they were the archbishops there at the church, but now it's a mosque. And a Turkish person who is from Marash, where my father was from, he took me around. He said, "Don't worry, I'll find the church for you." And he said, when I was a kid, we used to live in this neighborhood. So it was just amazing how we found each other on Facebook. And he toured me around. He says, "I'll find where the church was." So we found it like in 1 hour. But anyway, besides all that, I just want to clarify something. Mustafa Kemal, he is known to the West world that he was this great person who modernized Turkey, and he changed the Turkish alphabet from Arabic to Latin. It's just he was not a good person. He was a fascist. He wanted to Turkify Turkey. That means minorities had no right, nobody knows about this. They praise him in the West, thinking he's this guy who modernized Turkey. But by the same time, he introduced fascism and ultra-nationalism in Turkey. So until today, there are Armenians living in Anatolia who are half-blood Armenian. They are damn scared for anybody to know they have Armenian heritage. This is just ridiculous. Until this modern day in Turkey, Armenian heritage, they are scared to death because there's extreme ultra-nationalism going on. And of course, in Istanbul, it's different. It's more modernized, but lately there were attacks on the Armenian churches in Istanbul, and there was a death threat on Hrant Dink's daughter, Rachel Dink, who is the, Hrant Dink Foundation. She's, the head of the Hrant Dink Foundation. There was a death threat to her. I don't know if you guys know about this. So ultra-nationalism is extremely serious in Turkey. And then when I went there last year, I met some half Armenians living in Marash, where my father is from, and around that area. They were just so scared for even their friends to know they are half Armenian. So we can go to Q&A. Yes.
Phil, are you conducting the Q&A? People have raised their hand in the participant box, as well as Dave Clennon. Phil.
So, right, I have, besides Steve and Dave, there's Carol Francis, Dr. Ruby, and Ignacio.
Shall we go in that order, Phil? All right. First of all, I deeply want to thank Irena and our just an extraordinary presentation. Our two things: we are an activist organization. We do not just contemplate our navels and go to sleep every night. So separately, we need the petition to enforce the Genocide Act and any materials that you can email us. You have Darren's contact information from setting this up, or we can get it to you, because we want to understand what we can do to pressure elected officials to enforce that treaty. We're very aware of lobbying, and we've done a lot of lobby visits and meeting with legislators and the like. So we look forward to being a partner with you in that respect. My question is for a little more clarification on Adam Schiff and his grandfather, I believe you said, because I understood until today that Adam Schiff and his community was supportive of the Armenian community today. So I want to understand his forebears better, and in your opinion, what you view Adam Schiff's current status and whether he is an ally in the work you have planned.
Okay, so Adam Schiff and we actually have a history. The first time I met Adam Schiff was in 2013. I was on a hunger strike, and I was protesting President Barack Obama's acknowledging the election in Armenia as being legitimate. And Adam Schiff is my Congress representative currently. And I have to throw this out also. I'm actually running for Congress this go around. I didn't make the ballot itself. I'm still a candidate, but I didn't make the ballot yet because we don't even have the final count, actually. There's still 35% of the ballots that need to be counted. But Adam Schiff has used the Armenian people to get into office, playing on the genocide recognition drum, shall we say. And I need to note that the Armenian genocide was actually officially, and this is in the book, you can read the chapter under genocide recognition. So it has details on Adam Schiff's connection to Jacob Schiff and his position in the Armenian community. And basically, the Armenian genocide was officially recognized by the United States government going back to all three branches, I should say, have recognized the Armenian Genocide by the very early 1980s, 1981, I believe. It was President Ronald Reagan officially recognized the Armenian Genocide. And if you've heard about these recent House resolutions and Senate resolutions, if you read within the text, it always says the United States government officially recognized the Armenian Genocide, and then it spells out how they recognized it, the official recognition. So it was officially recognized, but Adam Schiff had been using that to say, it's not officially recognized, I'm going to work for you, I'm going to get it officially recognized, yada, yada, yada. And the reality was it was already officially recognized. So Adam Schiff has been playing the Armenian people for many years on their emotion of genocide recognition, and actually implying that we don't have genocide recognition when in fact we do. And once we had genocide recognition, that's one of the things is in my proposed bill for the enforcement of genocide and the punishment and reparations, is that the United States government, in order to allow somebody to sue a country or an individual in federal court, the United States government would have to officially recognize a genocide. So if the United States government has officially recognized the wrongdoings done to African Americans, then in a federal court of law, somebody of African American descent can turn around and sue the perpetrators or whoever was profited from that, whether that's generational, it was passed on, the spoils of whatever. The whole point is Adam Schiff is not a friend of the Armenians, and he even refuses to meet with me. Irena and I, we have been trying to meet with him for years regarding the Syria issue, and Adam Schiff it's very well documented that he's played a major role in arming the so-called moderate opposition, which we know is ISIS, ISIL, Al-Qaeda, and so on, and they have supplied them with hundreds of millions of dollars in weapons and support, which is an act of treason under the United States Constitution, because those terrorists are considered threats to national security, and that is treason. So Adam Schiff is not a part of, I can guarantee you, he will not back this. I mean, he may out of shame, I don't know, but he knows me very well. There's even videos online of Adam Schiff's bodyguard pushing me into the street practically to keep me away from asking Adam Schiff questions, and Adam Schiff avoiding me. So you can find those online. If you look up Adam Schiff, put my name in and put Adam's name in, you'll actually find those videos. So Adam Schiff, unfortunately, doesn't seem to quite represent us the way we need to. And the things that he does currently, if you analyze his actions, what he's voted on, what he's supported, it falls in line with Jacob Schiff, who, by the way, I should tell you, Jacob Schiff was a hardcore Republican, as was Theodore Roosevelt. And Jacob Schiff also helped to bring Woodrow Wilson to power. And as a thank you, and this is in the book, Jacob Schiff had Woodrow Wilson sign the Federal Reserve Act. So our Federal Reserve Act is thanks to Woodrow Wilson, but it goes back to Jacob Schiff. It even goes back to Morgenthau. It's in the book. When the Federal Reserve Act was passed, Morgenthau was supposed to come back to the United States as ambassador in Turkey and become the chairman of the Federal Reserve. And later on in the 1930s, his son, Morgenthau Jr., actually became the chairman of the Federal Reserve for a period of time. So these are all globalists, and Adam Schiff is connected to that family. And if you look at Adam Schiff's picture and Jacob Schiff's picture, it's in the book, they almost look like they're clones. They are from the same cloth, physically, I should say.
Okay, let's get to our hand raisers here. I have Dave, Carol, Francis, Ruby, and Lewis. Dave, you want to take it?
I also raised my hand, and Steve read my name.
Okay. Should I go, Phil Way? Should I go?
Well,
Phil Way?
I've not been muting myself. Yes, Dave, go ahead.
Okay. This is not my original question, but I just want to make a note. that we should hear from Anthony Manoogian and the Friends, the National Committee on Legislation, about the about legislation regarding the Armenian Genocide and whether and how Adam Schiff has participated in whatever legislative activities or blockage has taken place. My question for Irena and Ara is, would it be worthwhile to go back in history and talk to us about World War I, specifically how the Western imperial powers, Great Britain, France, and the United States, joined together to defeat the Ottoman Empire? All I know about that story is what I saw in Lawrence of Arabia. And we know that the defeat of the Ottoman Empire had a profound effect on Palestine and the people of Palestine, but I would like to know, if you think it's worthwhile, how the defeat of the Ottoman Empire affected the Turkish people and the Armenian people within the Ottoman Empire.
I would be more than happy to talk on that subject in depth. And in fact, a lot of what you just asked is covered in the pages of the book that you can read online at shahannatali.com.
Okay.
Okay, next up, Carol Francis.
I'm reading. Yeah, Ara, that was fantastic. I'm so glad to hear the economic, the whole political story behind. I'm wondering, can you quote for us what Hitler said about when he was asked?
Right. Okay. So yeah, I know the quote you're talking about, where basically this is what we are told he said. I'm not sure. I haven't actually been able to confirm it. Some people refute it, but basically Hitler had said when he was planning the annihilation of the Jews, he said, after all, who remembers the Armenian people? That was what Hitler basically said. And that was his justification. I want to point something out that you mentioned Hitler. When Hitler first got started, my grandfather, who was in Boston at the time, in Massachusetts, one of his bodyguards, who had become an attorney, was approached by a group of Jewish lawyers, and they had heard about my grandfather, and it wasn't well publicized, but he was known amongst certain circles for his participation in getting rid of Talat Pasha and these other leaders. And they actually approached his friend, who was his former bodyguard and is now an attorney, and they wanted to hire him to hunt down and assassinate Adolf Hitler. And so my grandfather, who already has people in Germany, he didn't see it as much of a problem. At that time, Hitler wasn't even that much of a threat in terms of the Holocaust had just begun, or it was in the starting phases. So he basically named his price of what he needed. So the Operation Nemesis, I believe it cost $150,000 to $250,000 in 1920. So my grandfather said, have them deposit $1 million in a bank, and we'll run the operation and consider Hitler dead. And these Jewish attorneys thought that was too much money, so they declined his offer, or they declined him. And Adolf Hitler went on to do what he was doing, but he was actually, propositioned to go and terminate Hitler. So I want to throw that out.
Thank you. Ruby, I think you're up next.
Yes, I had to unmute myself. First, I want to thank you for the information. I guess it was about, let's see, well, about maybe 12 years ago when the doctor stopped me from driving, I've had many, many Armenian drivers. And so it's like, I never knew this information and the comparative analysis of what they went through or their parents or grandparents went through in their country with the Turkish people. And I'm just comparing this genocide. It's something that comes up in different generations. So my thing is really is working on the, you know, I know we're talking about reparation and, you know, being paid for it and everything, but I'm looking at the young people, how they're getting together, you know, all the different colors and national, understanding each other without trying to take each other's religion or their beliefs away. So in working together on this, you know, I think, you know, there's a generation gap in a lot of people because of the hurt, and your mind is at the hurt. And I'm miscegenated. I'm with 3 different people. So I just look at, you know, what we can do now and spend the energy to go forward. Yes, for me, genocide is a crime. So that would be something that I think that ICUJP could go forward with the conference, you know, once it's set up and everything, making, you know, that recognized here in the United States. So I want to thank you again for your presentation today.
Thank you.
Do you have a response to that, or shall we go on to the next?
Yeah, I think that was more of a commentary. I don't know if there's a response.
I think Louis, you're up next. Louis, your hand was raised. Do you want to talk? But you need to unmute yourself, please. Louis, unmute yourself. We can't hear you.
No, I think that was in error.
The hand was an error. Okay.
The amount of sort of inhumanity to each other, and it is as if we put all of this in a boiling pot, what kind of world do we have? We have to have a I don't know how, where do we meet to simply have a major conference on all of these atrocities that are taking place or have taken place, and living with the legacy, the trauma of all of this, given to our present context of the trauma with which our, let's say, people of color and others are living in the United States. We obviously have put ourselves in positions where human life is not valued more than things.
Okay. Thank you. I think we need to move into our closing things. Irena, you wanted to—
Wait a minute, Phil, Ignacio had his hand up.
I didn't see it on the list, but anyway,
Also,
Irena, I think also wants to speak.
Well, you know, Steve mentioned that very early, Phil. If I may very quickly, just I have a very short question. I wanted to know where the Manoogian and that whole family fits. And also, my understanding was that there was a little bit of a division in the Armenian community between Armenians that are from Armenia and who reside primarily in the Hollywood area, or used to anyway, and the Glendale side of the Armenians. So as a Methodist pastor, I had a very strong relationship with many Armenians because they became members of the Methodist Church. One of them became district superintendent, and he was married to Manoogian's sister. he has died, but she's still alive and lives in Santa Barbara, Martha Dukmajian. So, and they were Republicans. So I'm wondering about the internal divisions within the Armenian community. I also want to just say thank you so much, because I think your explanation takes out the Muslim element in there. I mean, obviously Muslims sold out to the imperialists, but also it was the Muslims who opened up the Ottoman Empire to the Jews that had been expelled from Spain, and took them into the Ottoman Empire, and they enriched the Ottoman Empire. The loss was Spain's loss. That brain drain from Spain went to the Ottoman period empire.
They did, and let me touch on that also, since you brought up the Jews from Spain. A lot of those would eventually, at some point in history, be forced to convert to Islam, and those were the ones primarily that were involved in the Young Turk movement, as I mentioned in the presentation. And naturally, there's a very interesting, somebody mentioned Lawrence of Arabia, and that's the story that they know. Lawrence, as you know, Lawrence of Arabia, he was a spy. This is all in the book also. I cover the spies that were involved. And one of the spies was named Aubrey Herbert. And he actually ends up interviewing Talat Pasha a few days, 10 days before his assassination in Germany. They meet in a park, and it's all covered in the book. The actual interview is in there also. I republished some of the memoirs of Aubrey Herbert, but one of the things that Aubrey Herbert talks about is the Jews, the Greeks, and the Armenians, and how they are economic rivals, and how the Jews would often finance the demise of the Armenian economic rivals. And this is somebody who was very close with the Young Turks. He was close with Talat. He was in Salonika, and he was a spy. He was from the British side, and you can read about that. But the Jews that came to the Ottoman Empire later on, as we see at the turn of the century, with the help of, for instance, the Rothschilds, who are a very prominent Jewish family, were assisting them in order to take over the Ottoman Empire. And one of the things that Morgenthau was working on was the liberation of Palestine for the sake of the Jewish homeland. And in fact, prior to World War I, or right around World War I, there was an offer on the table to purchase Palestine from the Ottoman Empire. And it's in the book. I actually found some information about that in the newspapers at that time. And Jacob Schiff's name comes up, Adam Schiff's great-granduncle. And so he was involved in the formation of the modern, what we know as Israel today. And he was actually one of the original founders, or the godfathers of Zionism, this Jacob Schiff. And Adam Schiff is also a part of that too. There are a lot of common denominators that are connected within the book. When you read it, you'll see all of those.
Okay, I'm going to ask Ignacio if you would do our closeout comments today. Would that be okay?
Closing prayer.
Yeah.
Phil, it looks like Irena wants to make a final comment.
Yes.
Yes, I'm sorry. Well, kind of to respond to Dave Clennon, of course, it was like during World War I, the colonialists and the imperial powers were fighting each other, France, England, and then Germany was allies with Turkey. So it was just, all this was done under the guise of, it was during the World War I, when everybody wanted to get a piece of their land. Yeah, Dave, I'm sorry that I didn't give too much explanation, but anyway, so yes, and unfortunately some Armenians joined with the Turks keep on accusing Armenians you were traitors because they joined with the colonial powers. But after so much oppression and massacres and just sometimes you don't have a choice. You think if you join Britain or France, they're going to save you, which is not the case. I keep on saying don't trust the colonial powers. In fact, the first time the massacres 1915, that part where my father is from, they were massacred and then deported. And then France made a treaty with Turkey. So then the French people said to the Armenians, come back, and then you're gonna be under our mandate. Like Lebanon and Syria were under the French mandate, and then Iraq was under the British mandate. So they said you're gonna have your piece of land in our Armenian highlands, come back, and then you're gonna be under our mandate. So here, my father's family and thousands of Armenians go back to Turkey and resettle, and then 3-4 years later, the French break the treaty with Turkey and they escape in the middle of the night. The French soldiers left Turkey in the middle of the night. They had their horses' hooves covered with cloth, so no Armenians would hear them leaving. And then the next morning, the massacres start again. So that's why there was a second massacre and deportation in 1920. So it's just like, amazing.
And what Irena just spoke of is also covered in the book. You can read about that. It's in there.
Okay.
There was one question from Michael that we didn't have time to get to, but Ara and Irena, if it's okay, I'm going to email that to you. Maybe you could respond to that.
Sure.
Okay, that'll be great. Thank you. Phil?
Okay, I misunderstood. Your email them.
Yes, we'll just follow that up with email. Yes.
Okay, I'm sorry, I misunderstood. Any other announcements before we close?
Yes.
Go.
Oh, is it possible to, the books are flashing up with the names that they would like us to read. If you could make a list of the books.
Just one book.
Well, I got 3 books, 3 different people.
I'll share the chat messages with everyone. It has some good info and suggestions in there.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Darren, it's David Clinton. If I may just ask a quick question. I went online to try to access Betrayal, the book, and I cannot find a way to access it for free. So can we have some online discussion after the forum about how to find the book and how to download it?
Sure. I mean, would Ara and Irena, maybe you could just stay on for a few minutes after our official close, and
okay.
If you have that info to share, that would be great.
Thank you.
Okay. Can we do some quick announcements?
I have an announcement.
Go for it.
Me?
Go, Francis, yes.
Okay, July 26th, the anniversary of the Moncada, the beginning of the Cuban Revolution, there will be a national event, a Zoom event taking in people from all over the country, but specifically with LA people. It will be in places if it's opened up by that time for a live event, but it definitely will be a Zoom event. So the Cuban Revolution, starting at the storming of the Moncada, July 26th. See you all then. Thanks.
I would like to announce that Jim Lawson's nonviolence workshops will be resuming online. And Vita, could you help me with the date on that? I think it's the last Saturday this month.
Yeah, it's going to be June the 27th.
Yeah, right,
There'll be a notice out, but it'll be
right.
9 to noon. I don't know.
It will be good to see him back doing the
Yeah,
thing. Okay, any other announcements? Okay, let's circle up, and Ignacio, could you close us out?
I want to start the closing with a public apology to our chairman. I got into a conversation with him that was motivated by my anger at the presence of the Korean woman, a Methodist from Wilshire United Methodist, that made a terrible presentation. And in the midst of my anger, I just did not edit myself, and I sent an email in which I was critical of converted Jews that many times tend to be uncritical about Zionism. And that followed then a direct conversation by email between Steve and myself. And I promised him that I would publicly apologize. And I'm doing that. And I just want to tell you that he has written a tremendous letter to the editor, pointing out the training which the Israeli forces have done of policemen in the United States, and that the knee on the neck technique is a well-known technique in Palestine used by the Israeli forces. It is my hope that the LA Times will publish it, but I will not hold my breath. The corporate-owned media does not want to touch Israel at all. And but again, my apologies, Steve, and my apologies to the ICUJP, because I also essentially said that ICUJP was becoming a decrepit organization. And today and last week showed me the vitality of our organization. And we're doing great honor to George Rigas and Jim Lawson, the co-founders of ICUJP, with the way we continue to carry. And I will not be so much on the sidelines anymore. Again, Steve, thank you very much for the honest exchange, which also just shows how important it is to disagree openly without being disagreeable.
Thank you.
Let's just
Thank you, Ignacio, very much from the bottom of my heart. We are stronger and better with your active participation.
Thank you very much. Well, let's pause for 15 seconds of silence. Let us go from this place energized by what we have learned and motivated to continue being the force that our founders envisioned this organization to be. Each one of us in our own faith, let's move on. And at this time in particular, let's think of Joseph Prabhu, whose sister died in India, and Joseph is unable to go to India, and yet he's in the midst of grief. So I just ask all of us to hold him in our prayers and to communicate with him via email, to give him the assurance that he is thought about, and that we will keep on hoping that he will continue being the force that he has been in the past. May God bless us all. Amen.